Hello and welcome to Business Review on iBrandTV. My name is Bernard Joseph, and here on the program, we try to make sense of all the issues playing out across business sectors in Nigeria. And Nigeria is in its second recession in 5 years. What does this mean for Nigerians and for Nigeria? And how can Nigeria get itself quickly out of this recession? Joining me now on the program to put the issue in context is a journalist, David Undein, who will be talking to us on the issues playing out and how Nigeria can quickly navigate itself out of the current recession. David Undein is a journalist and will be helping put the issues in context and in perspective. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. Now let's dive right into it. Nigeria, second recession in 5 years. But let's not take for granted that a lot of people watching this show right now understand what it means for a country to be in recession. So I'll need you to help make sense of that conversation as to what in actual fact is a recession.
Right. So in the simplest possible terms, a recession means that your economy is shrinking instead of growing. So generally, it's bad news. In a developing economy like Nigeria, typically, uh, words like recession aren't supposed to exist. If a developing economy which already has so many issues that it's battling with is supposed to have a baseline level of growth to even have a chance of escaping poverty. So in sub-Saharan Africa, for many years, that baseline was 5%. Right? It was assumed that if you could manage to sustain an annual growth rate of 5%, then within 20 or 30 years, you would get out of the low-income category. So, but when you below that 5% and you get to zero, below zero, which is where we are right now, then you're in a recession. That means that as poor as you are, the economy is actually getting smaller, which means people are getting even poorer. Essentially, that's a very stripped down explanation of what a recession is.
Now, when you say that in a country like Nigeria, we're not even supposed to be having a conversation about recession, what does that mean? Are there things we're doing as a people that has led us to a point where we shouldn't even be in the first place?
Absolutely. So, and for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to restrict myself to just two major things. The first, obviously, is the unbelievable decision to close Nigeria's land borders to both import and export trade. Now, the reason I say that unbelievable decision is that if you actually look at the figures, Nigeria has a trade surplus with its land neighbors. What that means in plain English is that Nigeria exports more to its West African neighbors than it imports. So Nigeria is a net is a net beneficiary of trade across its land borders. So closing borders was essentially self-harm. Essentially, you hurt Nigeria more than you hurt the people that you were trying to stop, supposedly trying to stop from smuggling stuff into Nigeria. It made no sense. And as we're speaking up till now, the borders are still closed. And why that is especially unbelievable is that just last week, Nigeria ratified the ACTA Treaty. Now, the ACTA means the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, what that essentially means is that, or I believe 51, or is it 50 countries have ratified it. Now, that means that there's going to be a free trade area of 50 countries across Africa. Now, in a free trade area, there are no customs duties, there are no levies, taxes, everything is unified. There's free trade, free movement of capital, free movement of goods, and free movement of people. Now, if you say that you signed that agreement and then your borders are still closed to trade with your neighbors, then it begs the question, what exactly is going on? So that's the first thing, closing borders to trade. That has not helped at all. Now, the second and perhaps the more important one in the context of the kind of year that 2020 has been was the decision to lock down Nigeria's economy
in the wake of COVID-19.
Yes. Now, it was a very unpopular position at the time, but I was one of a few people who consistently maintained that the decision to lock down Nigeria's economy made no sense whatsoever. First of all, from a non-economic point of view, from a social point of view, from a sociological point of view, you couldn't even enforce it. Nigeria did not have the capacity to enforce it. right? That was the number one thing. The number two thing is if you look at the breakdown of Nigeria's economy, the number of people who are employed in the formal sector versus the informal sector. The informal sector employs at least 65% of Nigerians who are in employment. So essentially, what that means is that at least 65% of Nigerians who have a job in an occupation where there's no written contracts, there's no salary at the end of the month. It's people just going out and hustling from day to day. So your mechanics, your people working in shops, your bakeries, all those things, 65% of Nigeria's economy, that's where it is. So if you say you lock down the economy and stop all these people from coming out to find their daily bread, that means essentially you are grounding 65%, at least 65% of Nigeria's economy, at least. So you can imagine what the ripple effect of that was going to be. Now, at the time, I pointed out that many of our contemporaries across Africa, such as Kenya, for example, found ways of dealing with their own coronavirus situation without imposing disastrous top-down lockdown. So Kenya, instead of doing a lockdown, they had a 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. curfew, and then they mandated of masks and the social distancing measures.
Now, when you take into context the closure of the land border and then the impact that the shutdown of the economy as a result of COVID-19, when you put that into context as a possible reason why we are where we are in terms of the current recession. So in your case, or rather in your position, the recession was no longer a matter of if, it was now a case of when. So so you're not surprised that we are in a recession right now?
No, and in fact, if you look at the numbers I should also clarify that what is classified as a recession is when you have two successive quarters of negative growth. Negative growth basically means the economy growing below zero. So your economy shrinks. So you have two successive quarters. That's two successive 3-month periods of that happening. That's officially in a recession. So the reason it's announced now is because after the results from Q3, that's the third quarter, came out a few days ago, it has been confirmed second successive quarter there was negative growth. But if you actually look at the results from Q2, Nigeria had a disastrous Q2. Nigeria shrank more than 6% in Q2, which was the period that included the actual lockdown. So as I was coming to when I was commenting earlier, when you disrupt a supply chain, the results aren't immediate. Sometimes the results are suspended. Sometimes they will come and meet you in front. I think that we haven't still seen the worst of it. Well, okay, let me not say the worst of it, but we haven't still seen all of it yet. We're still going to see some fallout from that coronavirus lockdown in Q4 and possibly Q1 of next year as well. Because when you disrupt a supply chain, before you can get it back up to where it was before, it takes time. It takes a lot of time because trade is a very complex thing like that. Once a supply.
So what should be the response of the Nigerian government right now? I mean, saying that we haven't seen the worst of it yet, you would expect that the government should begin to take the right posture in terms of reversing the dialectics. What should be the right government response right now in order to help manage the crisis that we're seeing ahead as a result of this recession?
Right. So for the benefit of viewers who may not be familiar with all this terminology, the basic way of getting out of recession, the only way of getting out of recession is essentially spending money, because the recession means that the economy is shrinking. So if everybody starts spending money at the same time and the economy grows, then that's how you get out of recession. Obviously, that's not going to happen because people have fears. There isn't money in people's pockets. So in this case, the only entity that has the ability to spark the economy into life is the government. Now, the US government doesn't really have that kind of money on its hands anymore to go out and do a huge stimulus package, the kind that maybe the US and the UK and France and Italy did. The US government does not have that kind of money. We know that. However, the things that the Nigerian government can do now, first of all, that land border closure policy, it needs to tie it to a stone and throw it into the Atlantic Ocean immediately. Those
Mm-hmm.
borders need to be open yesterday. Trade needs to start happening again. Because one
Mm-hmm.
of the issues, one of the problems with this recession is that it isn't just a recession. So there's also something called stagflation going on. Now, what is
Mm-hmm.
stagflation? Stagflation means that there's a recession, first of all, there's
Mm-hmm.
a high rate of consumer inflation, second of all,
Mm-hmm.
which means that goods are getting more expensive for people,
Mm-hmm.
especially food. And third, means that unemployment is growing.
Mm-hmm.
Unemployment is high and unemployment is growing. That's what we call stagflation. So that's what Nigeria is actually going through right now. So what you need to do as a matter of urgency is to get as many people back into the workforce as quickly as possible. The
Mm-hmm.
most immediate way of that is to, because the trading sector is probably the sector that employs the most, well, after agriculture anyway, it's probably the sector that employs the most Nigerians. Get active in the economy as quickly as possible. Open those borders,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let people buy and sell,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the long term, it might not do much, but in the short term, it creates a spurt of economic activity, and that in itself might be all that shot in the arm, might be all you need in the short term. Um, Ordinarily, I would have suggested some kind of stimulus package,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm afraid to such a thing now because, as you know, the Nigerian government really doesn't have. The Nigerian government is practically insolvent, so the only way to raise that kind of money would be either to borrow, which I mean, the I was seeing some figures yesterday. The debt servicing to government income ratio is almost 1 to 1. It's almost
Mm-hmm.
equal. Nigeria is basically almost for every 1 naira Nigeria makes, Nigeria is spending something like 94 kobo on servicing debts. So taking on more debt might not be the wisest thing to do now. And the only other thing that can do, which again would be a disastrous thing for them to do, would be to start to print money like
Mm-hmm.
the Americans. The Americans can afford to print money because they're outsourcing the inflation risk to the rest of the world. The dollar is a global reserve currency. So
That's
the
right.
risk is not shared across the world. We
That's
can't do that because it's not used outside of Nigeria. So if we do that, we're going to become Zimbabwe.
Yeah, that's right. But talking about Nigeria's debt at this time, now the former governor of Anambra State, Governor Peter Obi, he keeps talking about Nigeria and how much we continue to borrow and spending on the wrong things. He talks about the fact that Nigeria would either have to stop the borrowing, or when you borrow, you have to invest what you have borrowed on infrastructure and on things that can help upscale the economy. Now,
Exactly.
what do you think about his position with regards to how, as a people, as the Nigerian government can begin to change their approach towards funds that are borrowed into channeling it into the right sectors in order to help avert cases of recession and other negative turns in relation to the Nigerian economy?
So I think the most important sort of paradigm shift that has to happen in the Nigerian government is that the Nigerian government needs to stop believing that Nigeria is a rich country. Because this is a
Hmm.
huge misconception that successive governments have had. It's not just this government, it's a successive thing. The issue is, what are you borrowing for? Right? If you're borrowing to build infrastructure that will pay itself off and that will
Mhm.
spark the economy into. So, for example, as I've been advocating for a very long time, a high-speed rail link between, say, Lagos and Port Harcourt or Lagos and Onitsha,
Mhm.
right? Because it has two main economic hubs: the southwestern economic hub, which is between Lagos and Ibadan, and the
Mhm.
southeastern economic hub, which runs from Enugu through Aba, Onitsha, that hub,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Those two hubs are not connected directly. There's no direct transport link, cheap transport link across those two hubs, which
Mhm.
makes moving goods from port to market or from market to port very
Mhm.
expensive.
Mhm.
And if you look at the figures, that transport expense, it puts as much as 60% of the final cost of goods
Mhm.
onto the prices that Nigerians see. So those are the things that make Nigerian goods uncompetitive compared to imports, right? So if
Mhm.
you're building that kind of infrastructure, first of all, there's not going to be a problem with demand. People are
Mhm.
always going to want a train line between Lagos and Port Harcourt or Lagos and Onitsha. It will always be full. It will pay
Mhm.
off its loan, and then its existence will create a GDP boost. It will spark the economy into life. So borrowing for that kind of purpose will not be a problem. Where there's a problem is where you're borrowing to build a rail line, as President Jonathan did, from
Mm-hmm.
Abuja to Kaduna,
Mm-hmm.
for example. A rail line which now, as we're starting to see, is completely unviable. It's been subsidized for years. The government no longer has the money to subsidize it. They've started raising the fares. People are complaining. The numbers are dropping, and then the ability of the National Railway Corporation to take care of the trains itself is not so high. So the trains have started breaking down in between stations, that kind of thing. And all of this, bear in mind, was based on an $800 million loan, which has still not been paid off, which is still going to need to be paid off. The Chinese will get their money back one way or the other.
Are
So that's where
you
the problem.
now, are you optimistic? You talked about the paradigm shift that the government must have if we are to change the narrative in terms of how we borrow and how we make use of those resources. Are you optimistic that that paradigm shift will happen anytime soon within the current government?
Within the current government, absolutely not. It's not going to happen. I mean, we've seen enough to know that this is all they know. This current administration is I'm looking for a complimentary way to say it, but they are what you would describe as statists, right? They're not even socialists, they are statists. They believe the state needs to be a central figure in charge of the economy. The state needs to be in charge of everything. And where you have statism, the other things that come along with it. So where there's a particular group of, or it's perceived that maybe a particular ethnic group is the one in charge of the presidency, or they're the ones who are in power now, where those people are statists, then you start having interests around them, we try to make them feel like, this is our time now. So, then you start hearing things like, oh, we're constructing a $2.2 billion gas pipeline in Kano, which has no known petrochemical industry whatsoever. But we're constructing it to Kano for God knows what reason. Or we're borrowing $300 million to build a commuter railway in Kano. Nobody knows who is going to use that thing, how that debt is going to be paid off. We're going to do that anyway. Or we're building a line from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, where there's literal Boko Haram problem going. These are the things that tend to happen when statists are in power. And unfortunately, this administration is filled with statists. So that is going to change. However, hopefully, if after 2023, there's a peaceful transition of power and a new sort of market-focused administration comes in, hopefully they would have seen from the 8 years that using power this way ends up making everybody poorer, including the people you think you are favoring. Because even the North has not been helped by this approach to governance. The North is actually better off when there's a prosperous South. That's the truth, because Nigeria's economy is interconnected. But when instead they're trying to divert productive funds, white elephants, it doesn't really help anybody except the contractors and the people in and around power themselves. So hopefully, after this government leaves, hopefully the next administration will be wiser by experience. I will understand what to do, more importantly, what not to do.
Now I know that you constantly make use of your Twitter platform, that I know for sure, to help educate Nigerians and everyone who cares to have that information with regards to the business space of Nigerians. But in this conversation at this time, what would you like to say to Nigerians as their response towards this negative development that Nigeria is now in a recession? What would you be saying to Nigerians to be their approach towards the economy at this time?
Well, my personal approach, because I can speak for myself. I don't generally like preaching to people, but I can always speak for myself. My approach generally has been to try as much as possible to look for ways to plug myself into the global economy, to try and create sources of income which are basically USD denominated as much as possible. Right. So I'm a writer, so I do jobs for international clients. In fact, that to be my main source of income, more or less. So in so doing, on a personal level, that helps me hedge against naira inflation. Because if you're getting paid $1, even if $1 is 600 naira today, 1,000 naira tomorrow, your earnings are protected because you're getting paid in that dollar terms. But if you're making 600 naira and then and then the rate is rising tomorrow, your earnings are constantly being eroded. are
That's right.
unable to accumulate wealth, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
savings become less. And I was seeing a news item today that Keke Napep is now worth 1.1 million naira brand new, which I found absolutely amazing. That absolutely
Mm-hmm.
blew my mind when I. So, what I personally would recommend is right now, any major uh, capital expense
Mm-hmm.
that's isn't going to have uh, quick returns. That is that if you're except you have the money and you're
Mm-hmm.
settling in for the long term, you're prepared to take the risk. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. If like right now, I wouldn't be investing in a new car or trying to
Mm-hmm.
buy a plot of land or whatever because you know you're locking up.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you should protect whatever wealth that you have, whichever way it's possible that you can protect it. If it's possible that you can dollarize, if it's possible you can put your money into stable coins,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it's possible that I would have said real estate, but it's debatable whether real estate is actually, you know, it's actually a liquid investment in this part of the
Mm-hmm.
world. But people's approach generally should be to protect their wealth now and strap in because this, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, even if Nigeria makes it out of recession by next year or so, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
the days of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% growth are not going to come back at least until this administration leaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means is that even if we go back into positive growth,
Mm-hmm.
if the economy is growing and there's 1% growth,
Mm-hmm.
as long as the naira inflation rate still remains where it is,
Mm-hmm.
your savings is still going to be eroded,
Hmm.
which
Uh,
my opinion is limits.
hmm. David, of course, your perspective on issues involving the economy and business sector, of course, would always leave everyone better informed and be able to put the issues more in context and in perspective. We're very grateful for having you on the program on Business Review on iBrand TV. David Hundeyi is an international journalist, writer, and broadcaster with a body of work in the African and global media space on platforms including the CNN, the Africa Report, the New Yorker Magazine, and the Washington Post. David Hundeyi, it's a pleasure to have had you on the program. We look forward to having you again next time, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a
All
pleasure.
right. I'll talk to you again next time.
All right.